welcome to this, what I'm going to call special event. We managed to take advantage of Bishop Perry's visit here to the Diocese of Grand Rapids. I was with Bishop Wakowiak just a few weeks back, and he said, "Are you aware that Bishop Joseph Perry is coming to the Diocese of Grand Rapids, and he's going to be speaking at the Benedictine Institute on a Monday evening and here for the Red Mass and the attorneys here in town on Wednesday evening. You might want to reach out and see if he may be available to do something for Catholic schools." So I thought, oh my goodness, what a wonderful opportunity. So we did reach out through Connor Dugan, a local attorney who often works here with the Diocese of Grand Rapids. And Bishop Perry was so generous in fitting us in this morning. And I have oriented Bishop to the fact that we extended the invitation beyond just Catholic schools and teachers, because most of our teachers wouldn't be able to make it today. They're all in school, and many of our leaders, and we didn't have another opportunity for our pastors, our deacons, our pastoral ministers, and our Catholic school folks. So we've got a nice sort of diverse crowd here today from lots of different ministries, and I just want to welcome you from wherever you come today. We're glad that you're here, and hope that this is a blessing for you. So without further ado, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce the Most Reverend Joseph N. Perry, Auxiliary Bishop Emeritus, recently retired as Auxiliary Bishop of the Archdiocese of Chicago, and retired after service as Auxiliary Bishop since June 29 of 1998, and was originally ordained the Archdiocese of Milwaukee as a priest in May of 1975. So Bishop Perry is also, I believe, and Bishop Perry, I forgot to ask you this question, I believe is still the chairman of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism. Are you still active in that role as chairman? I'm assuming from everything I've read that you are. Thank you. So, and because of that role, in the richness of that role, I today want to just say thank you to Bishop Perry for all the resources that we find at the USCCB website to help us in our work against racism. There are some really wonderful resources, and they're continually updated, and more things are added. And so we really appreciate the work of your committee. I thought I would spend a moment just talking about the mandate of the committee, because I really believe that is what brings Bishop Perry to us this morning. United States Conference of Catholic Bishops Ad Hoc Committee Against Racism seeks to teach about and to witness to the intrinsic dignity of the human person as an antidote to the grave sin of racism. The committee explores and implements concrete solutions to address the racism that still pervades our society and our church today, and works in collaborative ways to strengthen the response of all people to this evil. So it is my pleasure, as I told Bishop Perry this morning, we are very underrepresented, the African American Black community here in both in the Diocese of Grand Rapids and in the city of Grand Rapids, in our parishes and in our schools, by African Americans. They certainly are here in greater number than the percentages which we have participating in our parishes and in our schools. And it is something that we've been working to try to welcome the African American community and Black individuals, families, people of color into our schools and our parishes for some time. And so we're just grateful to be able to absorb some of your wisdom today on this topic. So without further ado, Bishop Joseph and Perry. Welcome.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My honor to be here in Grand Rapids. I was thinking the last time I was here some years ago visiting a classmate of mine. Some of you might know him, Father Dennis Morrow.
Yeah.
We studied together in Washington, D.C. way back when we were canon lawyers, or preparing for canon law. He was such a vibrant personality and kept a humor going on amidst us as students with this heavy subject that we had to prepare ourselves for in service to the church. And I was really saddened by a series of illnesses that he succumbed to, and then, of course, his death. I noticed coming here, flying over here, your trees are much more advanced than they are in Chicago, but they're very pretty, if you want to know, from above, 10, 20,000 feet up. We had some little sunshine, and the colors were really, really, really remarkable. You don't always get to see them so much right on the ground, but from above, from God's point of view, it looks nice. Let me offer you some reflections on a dogged topic. These reflections I put together for you. I've never done this before any other audience so far, so we'll test it out and see what you think. My middle name inherited from my father is Nathanael. My father was Joseph Nathanael Sr., and he behooved himself to name me Junior. There is a Saint Nathanael from Christian apostolic times, also depicted in history as Bartholomew. He will appear in our liturgical calendar as Bartholomew. The Orthodox Christians treat him as Bartholomew, but John's Gospel notes him as Nathanael, the one who was under the fig tree, whom the Lord Jesus spied. He's one of the mystery men of the 12 apostles. There's a number of them we don't know much about, but we know a little bit more about Nathanael. He was from the town of Cana in the Galilee region of Palestine, what is, from our view, the upper portion of Israel today. The village of Cana is the same village where Jesus, at the prodding of his mother, of course, saved this couple from embarrassment at their wedding when the spirits ran out. Weddings took place usually over a series of days, and in such a dry, arid land of Palestine of that time, they ran out of wine. And it turned out to be a remarkable event for a young couple who were just starting out together. The Gospel of John describes when and how Nathanael met Jesus. And contained in the episode is a very important lesson, and it has to do with this thing called prejudice. The gospel narrative tells us this first, that Philip became a follower of Jesus in step with several other young Jewish men in the lakeside neighborhoods, the villages that surrounded the great lake of Galilee. And then Philip found his friend Nathanael and told him, guess what? We have found him of whom Moses and the prophets spoke, Jesus of Nazareth. And as you recall from the gospel, Nathanael apparently was unimpressed and quipped back at Philip, can anything good come out of that place, Nazareth? To which Philip replied to him, come and see for yourself. Nathanael had an obvious distrust and a dislike for folks who lived in the town of Nazareth. He seems to have gathered up an entire population in one bundle of contempt and refused to believe anything good about anyone there. This was an example of prejudice and what it can possibly mean and what it has meant over the course of the human condition. There's nothing rational or reasonable about it most of the time. It tends to take a group of people, lump them all together, tag them with one label, even despises them. But what's so wrong with that English word prejudice? We sort out people day in and day out in our lives. We make value judgments and assessments about people every day, especially those who get in our way or those who irritate us or seem different than ourselves, or people who are the subject of rumor or gossip. We have to admit that prejudice is one of our most respectable sins. It doesn't carry with it the social stigma that some sins do. If you're guilty of murder, for example, then you have to answer to the law and will also in varying degrees be isolated from society. But prejudice is different. We can dislike people for the color of their skin or the shape of their nose or the color of their eyes or the language they speak, the sound of their voice, and still go to all the places and do all the things that nice people do. A lot of people these days settle upon being nice people. I bother no one. I trouble no one. Being nice is the ultimate virtue of society today. But our Christianity prods us to be more than just simply nice people. We're asked to be courageous people, heroic people in terms of the divine message. Prejudice allows us to protect our private space for the most part. It's sort of a respectable sin, but that is only because we fail to see it for what it really is. If you look at the ghettos and rundown areas of our cities and towns where people of color are crowded together in substandard housing, or where the unemployment rate is double or triple of that of the nation as a whole, where crime breeds almost as rapidly as the rats in the sewers, that's prejudice. And collectively, we are indifferent to the situation. We are driven to protect ourselves from them. We go so far as to condemn the people who live in those areas as if it's their fault for living that way. Like Nathanael, before he even met Jesus, what good can come out of that neighborhood? We quip. Well, Nathanael discovered that Jesus was from Nazareth, that terrible place and those terrible people. And is it all that bad? Is it really that bad? You remember the Holocaust of World War II when the Nazis were responsible for the slaughter of some 6 million Jews and a whole slew of others. Prejudice did that. One man's contempt for a race of people spread to other people and finally became a national pastime, a national obsession, we might say. One man's contempt for a race of people spread to other people. Adolf Hitler spoke of a final solution to the Jewish problem. And you can immediately see the implications of such words, such wording. The Jews were not people. They were not human beings. They were a problem. And such is the insanity and the irrationality, the despicable face prejudice. When carried to the extreme, it can justify some horrific outcomes. But not only does prejudice hurt the people toward whom it is directed, it hurts the people from whom it emanates. Prejudice almost cost Nathanael the opportunity to meet the best man, the holiest of men, the loveliest of men ever known, Jesus himself. And we wonder what it is costing some people today. There are people of other races, other cultures, other religions who greatly enrich our individual experience. But because of prejudice, we push them away. We keep them down. We refuse to let them become what they can become or have the potential to be. And we wonder oftentimes how many brilliant young minds have been wasted and are now wasting in the slums and the ghettos of our towns and cities, pushed into or confined to the unknown or the obscure, the out of sight and out of mind. And unless we check ourselves and our preferences, we easily jump on the societal bandwagon that has ultimately labeled certain people as the different or the other, and as those people whom we would not associate with because they are not like us. Prejudice cheats both the sender and the receiver, and left unchecked, prejudice exposes some of the most insane sins that human depravity has ever invented. And what can we do about it? Well, Philip here in the sacred text had the right answer. He said to Nathanael, "Come and see for yourself." Nathanael accepted the challenge and ended up a follower of Christ. Impressed by what he saw and heard and witnessed, he remarked finally to Jesus, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You must be the King of Israel." And then he became a disciple. He joined up with Jesus, and then this man to whom he expressed such skepticism about and his origins, Nathanael gave his life away for this Christ and his message. The turnaround is remarkable. I think it is just as dramatic as that of Saul of Tarsus. Well, Jesus is unique, but the solution to prejudice is not. The only answer is to look at people as individuals and see each one as a child of God. You see, it's easy to hate people in groups. It's easy to cast aspersions on whole groups of people, but you take them one at a time, and it becomes a totally different matter. And one of the problems, I think, in our day and age today, as simple as it may sound, is this whole idea of familiarization. We have spent so much time and energy and spilled blood over this issue of separate space. And some people have been sworn to it their whole lives, to preserve separate space. White people here and black people over here. My late father was a veteran of World War II. The U.S. Armed Services were racially segregated in those days, as you know. Blacks were not allowed to train or to fight alongside white men. It was until 1948 that Harry Truman apparently issued an executive order that desegregated the armed forces. In the meantime, amidst a number of stories that my father has told over the years about his experience as a recruit in the Army just after Pearl Harbor, is one little vignette that speaks of the insanity of prejudice. It's the story about a white man who was a son of the old South, and he had grown up believing that blacks were okay as long as they stayed in their place. And during the last years of World War II, this gentleman from the South apparently reached draft age and was inducted into the Army. One night he found himself in a troop transport riding across the Texas Panhandle. Everyone on that bus was a new recruit. They had never seen combat or been anywhere close to it yet, all except one man on that transport. And this man walked with a slight limp because his leg apparently was torn up in battle. But the left side of his chest was covered with decorations and ribbons awarded for valor. And he was black. And they stopped in a small town for dinner. Outside, the wind was howling and the snow was falling. The soldiers got off the bus and ran through the storm to the warmth of the restaurant. And midway through their meal, the man telling this story saw a waitress going outside with a plate of food. And then he realized that the black man who had fought for his country and bore ribbons on his chest walked with a limp, but was not allowed to come in and eat with his fellow soldiers. This was the 1940s. My father fought in that war and witnessed many other human incongruities and unimaginings. Those years of conflict that have entered the oral tradition of many veterans of his color and background. My father hesitated to tell me some of these stories until he was late in life. But then he opened up and began to tell me some of them. Here and there, friends, we are reminded when something awful happens that encoded in the American social pattern for a very long time now are some long-held objections, suspicions, prejudices, and denunciations of certain people. Black people, brown people, Middle Easterners, certain indigenous peoples, Asian peoples, need we say Jewish peoples. And there's work that still needs to be done to overcome prejudice, which by the observation of others across the ocean tends to be emblematic of America. We trust that the children and the grandchildren have a different idea to help accomplish that which we adults have been unable to achieve thus far in the name of affirmative human relations. What are we saying to the children and the grandchildren about this? They certainly will pick up, for good or for ill, where we have left off. It is said by child psychologists that by the age of 4, certainly a black child is aware that he or she is not loved like a white child in the everyday world. Daily there are images, reminders, confrontations, evaluations, comparisons, and slights that remind that a child that is white is right and a child that is black is wrong. Certainly by the age of 16, a young black male knows that American society fears him and does not see him equally endowed as a white peer. And unless someone comes to his rescue, he stands to be overlooked in favor of his white peer. And this kind of consciousness can result in one of two directions for the 16-year-old black young man. Either he will grab hold of his own strengths and be the best, achieve the highest he can, in order to beat the odds, we say, overturn the myths about black men while striving to be noticed, approved of, welcomed like any other young man, his peer, or due to a lack of self-esteem, self-confidence in face of what he sees in the mirror, he can turn to drink or antisocial behavior and become a menace to himself and others. The script has been written. I read somewhere that it starts with a kid's box of crayons or colored pencils. Somewhere along the line, we have implied or taught or coached children to see that the colors black and brown to be inferior to other colors. The children tend to color bad things and bad people, black and brown. How do we coach kids to use the black and brown colors that appear in their lives? God is the great artist, and therefore all colors are of same equal value, just as pretty as the white crayon or the yellow crayon, the orange, the blue, or any other color, because God has made it that way. God has made it that way. We all have prejudices of one sort or another. If we would be honest with ourselves, it's a human penchant that's part of our fallen nature. But as Christians, we are summoned by the gospel to overcome our prejudices, especially those prejudices that push people to the margins or disparage others before we have a chance to, as Pope Francis says, encounter them, have a chance to befriend them. This was the issue with Nathanael from the gospel before he met Jesus personally. Understand that certain of our preferences can be exaggerated to the point of excluding others for no logical reason, such as the insanity of prejudice. There's nothing right, there's nothing reasonable about it, and if we can dig deep down into our hearts and find any of it there, it helps to somehow expose it to the light, to confess it and ask God's forgiveness. At least this is the Christian way of handling it. If I was a parent, a married man, I would want my children to have a broad experience of God's variety. I would not raise my children in a single race environment. I would want them to learn from and relish the variety of God's creation and people, and school with, live alongside of, experience white, black, brown, whomever, people, because this is the kingdom of God that we should be preparing for when he returns. Today, in most places, you don't have to go too far to find God's variety in people. Now, certain civil laws have made it so. But as Catholic Christians particularly, we should feel an incompleteness, a sense generally an incompleteness with our parish congregations on Sunday that are single race, because that's abnormal. We have rested that this is the normal way we do things, but that's not how the church began. Pentecost, the birthday of the church, I mean, all these people were there to hear this Jesus story. We should feel an incompleteness within our parishes because our churches are meant to be exemplary images of what the kingdom is like. We can have our racial, social, and religious prejudices, or we can have Jesus Christ. You can't have both. The two are mutually exclusive. What can Catholics do, gentlemen, ladies? People ask me this all the time. I say, examine your circle of friends and associates. Are they of one racial or ethnic background? Is there some measure of human variety among those you associate with, work with, recreate with? Can our lives be shared with others so as to appreciate one another and respect the gift of human difference? If in fact that you are confined to live or work or worship or recreate in a single or confined racial setting, can you take steps to sow diversity in your human experience? Your workplace, your neighborhood, your church and its activities, your children's network of friends. Pentecost foisted the value of diversity in the Christian experience from the outset. We should sense this ecclesial incompleteness in our associations when racial demarcation is the routine in the networks and the living and the worship situations where we are involved. Our bishops in 2018 in their pastoral letter, only by forging authentic relationships can we truly see each other as Christ sees us, and then move us to take what we learn from our encounters with one another and examine where society continues to fail or where it perpetuates inequality and seek to address these problems. Reflect upon the scripts that you may have picked up unawares from your formative background. Sayings and the chatter of adults in the kitchen about other peoples and ethnicities. What have you picked up in this vein that's obviously divisive in tone or unsympathetic to the plight of peoples on the margins? Utterances based on ignorance about others. How have such sayings or prejudgments, stereotypes, and commentary influenced how you think about Black people, brown people, white people, or native peoples? How does all of this affect your knee-jerk reactions when coming in sight of a person who is racially or ethnically different than yourself? You notice these days, in an effort to reconcile with regrets stemming from the past, communities are boldly re-examining history and in instances dismantling monuments and erasing names originally erected to famous people whose lives were featured by investments in slavery, proponents of bigotry. How can you reconcile your past or eschew any traces of race bias left to grow on your skin? Do we subconsciously subscribe to a white environment being the best and the most profitable environment? Can you trust that anyone else of different background can live alongside you and contribute to the flourishing of the civic as well as the Christian community? What are you teaching your children and grandchildren about race difference? What is being taught to children about the equal value of the colors found in their box of crayons or colored pencils? And can you as a Christian speak up undaunted when someone or a group of people are being vilified for who they are, where they come from, or the language they speak? We are working right now in Chicago on a curriculum based on the life of the young boy, the lad of Augustus Tolton, to be used in our grade school and high schools, to be able to somehow sow within the fiber of these kids' lives from young ages onward a sense of empathy or feeling with people. I think that's where it humanly starts, where it can start. And these questions faced squarely out of the highest Christian sentiments go a long way in refashioning an environment in these times where everyone, be they white, black, brown, Middle Eastern, Asian, Native American, Christian, Muslim, or Jew, can live relishing their God-given human dignity. I think it's what we would like to work towards. Church teaching, which seeks to implement the social underpinnings of the gospel of Jesus Christ, contains much liberating greatness for those who appreciate the wisdom of our collective experience as Catholics. Groups of suffering peoples, be they Irish, Polish, Jewish, Italians, or whatever, everybody has suffered in some size, shape, or form. And if we can get into the same room and talk about our stories, which are similar in many respects, that's where empathy begins. But as long as we live and are so hyper concerned about separate space, when you're separate from people distance-wise, then we can easily succumb to thinking some spooky things about the other on the other side of the railroad tracks or the other side of the pond. We live in a fallen world, and that's too much turned in on itself. We are a wounded world, bound up merely in the shadow of that temple in which we wish to abide someday, truly as brothers and sisters, united in one spirit, one human family. This temple, called the Heavenly Jerusalem, is in a number of ways still under construction by the craft of our Christian lives. Can we contribute our lives to its construction is the question. Blessings to each of you for your Christian witness and all that you're doing to create the human family under one God. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Bishop Perry. Bishop Perry has generously also agreed to answer questions that we may have. So I invite you now to formulate any questions that you may have and share them with Bishop Perry. I have a question. So as you're formulating, this is something that we deal with sometimes in schools. And it has to do with, many schools have named an officer in their school, not necessarily Catholic schools, but many public schools under the title of DEI, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This has become, at least in our area, and I know across the nation in many ways, a controversial title. Now I know because I tried Magisterium AI that those words are rich words from magisterial documents, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yet we are hearing from parents and others that wouldn't be best practice in Catholic schools to name the committee or a position using those terms simply because of how they have been politicized and used most recently in our recent history. So this is one of those questions. Do we select some other terminology, or we think that some of the families who are actually trying to attract families of color to our schools want to see a DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion committee or work in a school because they know what that means?
That means a lot of things to different people. And it can push the margins to mean some things that the Christian community cannot absorb. There are certain things we can never do and certain things we can never be simply because we love and admire Jesus Christ. And the human condition being the human condition, people have a variety of reasons for that. My knee-jerk reaction is to stay away from politically charged terminology, because we end up being pushed to the wall and we end up like this man. So why don't you name it St. Nathanael, for example? some other neutral, or I don't know if you mix the public sector with the religious sector in these meetings. If not, then I think we can afford to choose our own terms, our own labels. I would stay away from DEI, that term, and choose something else that befits the Christian vision. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yes, Father.
Yes, Bishop, as you were talking about stereotype, I was in New York in the Diocese of Brooklyn as an associate pastor before coming to Grand Rapids, and we were going to have a very nice meal. It was prepared, and I do not know how this subject came in, and the pastor told me, Father, no matter how many degrees you have, no matter how many languages you speak, after all, you are from the third world.
You're from where?
After all, you are from the third world.
Oh, okay.
So I lost my appetite, and I have to give him, and because he left the priesthood after 2 years, and every year I send him a card with $100. I have forgiven him, but I cannot forget this.
Well, for the longest time, our parish communities were nationally formed. People came here to look for freedom and respite and a new life in our country, and they didn't know one another in Europe, so they didn't know anyone else here. But once they got here, we were thrown together around the corner, down the street, across the street. And this is where many of our parishes grew up. Italian church across the street, German down the street, Polish around the corner, or whatever. We're kind of forced to live with one another. And whenever you have diversity, you always have tension. But how do Christians handle tension is the question. How do we handle difference? How do we share the richness of our variety? That's the question, and that's always been a struggle for Americans. And people across the ocean have watched us, and they've observed. And that's why we're very emblematic for being a highly intolerant society, racially. And we're still working at it. And whereas there's been some sensitization going on and some marvelous things happening, here and there's something awful that surfaces. It really throws everyone into a tizzy. And you wonder what's underneath it, what hasn't been resolved, what is still going on in the minds and the hearts of people about one another. How come we cannot handle this better? It's our fallen nature. Yes?
How do you see economics playing in all of this? I've seen in some of the communities that I've been in, whether it was an under-resourced Catholic school like this, those groups tending to not have as many problems or prejudices because they were all kind of in a lower economic group, and maybe some other communities where if their economic group was elevated, again, not as many issues, but how do you see kind of that economic status playing into some of the prejudices with race?
Well, given our society, which is a very free enterprise system and very highly privatized, economics is a double-edged sword. It's an opportunity for improvement, but economics can also be the devil. In societies like ours, democratic societies and free societies, invariably you have certain people who are struggling in the bottom strata. You have people who are in between, whom we call the middle class. Thank God for the middle class. Otherwise, the people in the bottom strata will be warring against the rich. We somehow have been able to keep it for somewhat controlled. But we have our stratifications in American society, and they tend to be people of color in the bottom, because for so long they were kept down, they were oppressed, and they were not allowed to enter or to walk into spaces where you can thrive, simply because we condemned the color black in the human species. There's a book from Harvard by the sociologist Dr. Khalid Muhammad. The title of the book, I think it was his doctoral thesis, it's called The Condemnation of Blackness. We condemned dark people, and we easily justified capturing them, kidnapping them, and forcing them to do our dirty work without compensating them. And we couldn't solve the problem after it went on for so long. We ended up in a civil war about it. But we ignored the solution to the problem. So what happened? It morphed into segregation and discrimination. Again, keep white people away from black people and vice versa. Never the twain shall meet. All kinds of horrors resulted from that, because we could not admit the experience, the black experience, in our own experience. And we did everything, including ravaging of people and dispiriting them in that effort. And that's the results of what we're experiencing today. It all started with that first schooner leaving West Africa, crossing the Atlantic with human cargo. We suffered from it ever since. We kept black people away from progressive economics as much as we could. And if they entered anywhere in that, they had to do it on our terms. See that? It's quite a story. Yes?
You mentioned that prejudice is the most respected sin.
Excuse me? Say
You
that.
mentioned that prejudice is the most respected sin.
Yes.
I was wondering, how do you begin to build a relationship with someone that has already committed prejudice against you or your family or ethnicity? How do you build a relationship?
My father used to tell us when we were kids, if you run into anyone who dislikes you or hates you, smile and love them back. They either will do one of two things. They'll have to eventually convert and smile back at you, or they'll go crazy. That is something what Father did with the $100 bill and this other priest. That's how Christians do it. Simple as that. Yes?
We discussed a lot of the personal issues of prejudice, but as you mentioned, there's more societal issues. How do we as a church encourage societal changes more than just personal encounters? There are policies in place and in the way that society works keeps people down. So how do we encourage societal political change?
Well, we Catholics have to get into avenues and corridors of responsibility that have the upper hand on foisting change. And for the longest time, we Catholics were not there. We were suffering under anti-Catholicism in this country. So our bishops and our people tended to shy away because the penchant was to belong, become American. We couldn't accept Augustus Tolton in one of our seminaries in this country because to do so, we would lose benefactors, kind of thing. And we needed benefactors in order to survive and compete against the Protestant forces that were running the country. So Catholics have to get into, and previous generations encouraged young Catholic people to get into the corridors of power in order to change it around, at least for Catholicism. Mundelein Seminary, where I teach, was meant to be the Catholic University of America by Cardinal Mundelein. But the bishops had a vote that, no, we're going to put the university in Washington, D.C., so that our university can stare straight at the Capitol and make a difference. The legend has it that after that vote, the rest is history, that whenever they took up the collection from the bishops for the Catholic University, Cardinal Mundelein put in $1 in protest. So you look at the expanse of the seminary today, it looks like a huge university because he wanted it to be the center of Catholicism. You know, we had our own problems as Catholics here, and anti-Catholicism is still there to some degree. You know. Yes?
Bishop, this past weekend I was with a group of Aquinas College students. We were up in the Petoskey area with the Odawa people, a native tribe. And one of the places we visited was the former Indian boarding school. So this school that had been set up to take kids from their families, try to make them white. And so when I'm with one of these college students, when they see the Catholic Church, think about the Catholic Church, they think about that. This school was run by the Catholic Church up there. They see a school that participated in an institution like that, or a church that participated in the institution. So how do we help the young people we work with to see the beauty of Christ, the beauty of the church, without ignoring or downplaying some of the things that Christians have done in the past?
Well, first thing is, this is news for most people, especially the average Catholic. You know, when we think of native peoples, we think of Pocahontas, or Kateri Tekakwitha, or the Jesuits being massacred by the Iroquois. We don't see the other part, and that was the imperialism of the colonialization of so-called, how should I put it, expansion or development, and how, and we shouldn't apologize for it. It's being resurrected through discovery and those kinds of things. Just yesterday I approved of a program of discovery for Catholic territories and lands and cemeteries that are the result of not only slavery, but the indigenous schools of trying to make people, as far as possible, young people, white American, and to leave their savage habits behind. That was, quote unquote, the thinking of the times, but we now know that wasn't the best thinking of the times, and it destroyed a people. It was genocidal. But a lot of people were doing it in the name of, unfortunately, the name of God. I don't think we should avoid that. We should apologize to whoever is reading the story today, young people, and move forward. As I forget who said it. Was it Pope John Paul II? Oh, I think it was a Jewish rabbi told Pope John Paul II, he says, all are not responsible, but, no, excuse me, all are not guilty, but all are responsible. So there is such a thing as original sin, and there is such a thing as the legacy and inheritance of the sins of our forefathers. And the only way to handle it is to make sure it doesn't happen again. To try to do it better and not hide it. Apologize for it, because the people who were guilty of it are no longer here to speak the apology. That would be my approach. Yes, Father.
Your Excellency, this summer, His Excellency Bishop Barron was here giving a lecture on the philosophical foundations of wokeism, and he identified it as coming from critical theories
group warfare and class warfare that comes out of Marx and other totalitarian philosophies sees that's the only way human beings get along, unfortunately. It's not the way of the gospel, though. There's another way of getting along, and that comes from the passages of the gospel that we try to sow in our lives. That's the counter, and I think that was a theme most often enunciated by John Paul II against communism, Nazism, and so forth and so on. I think you have to intentionally avoid, quote unquote, wokeism, because it is anti-Christian, if not, I think, atheistic. And we have to show that up to our young people who are naturally exposed to those kinds of ideologies, even in the academic or in the day-to-day journalism and stuff that comes on the internet and so forth and so on. Is the Christian message still relevant for our times? Is a question I guess we pose with every generation. But we're here today because we believe that it is still relevant. Oftentimes at the cost of this, but it's still relevant. Yes?
With the onset of blended race families becoming more common now, I wonder how we integrate two different cultures or multiple cultures into our communities while still, while not diluting each culture. Because I think originally, as we're known as the melting pot, our cultures have become Americanized, and instead of celebrating a true, authentic culture from, say, a Miramax or something like that, then you would, how do you maintain the original culture so that it can be passed on with the dilution of language and things like that?
We don't have many structures that help that along. Intermarriage, racial intermarriage is not as common as we would like to think it is, but it's there. And it really falls to the geniusness of parents and families who I think can help it along if they come together to produce something out of their own genius. My own racial background is mixed, and my mother was English in background. My father was African American, and we had our tensions in our families because of that, because we had no tools with which to work with in those days. You either survived or you didn't. Most mixed racial families end up living with or growing up in the marginalized neighborhoods. They end up on the African American side more than the white side, because African Americans, miscegenation has been part of our history, for good or for bad. I have yet to see where that is done humanly and to the great advantage of everyone involved. But couples so often are left by themselves to do it or to suffer by themselves. But I think it helps if people can come together in kind of collective groups or support groups and come up with their own genius that way, because it is the rule of life. Going back at least to the 1980s, and journals like The Atlantic, The New York Times, what else? The New Yorker. There were these subtle hints of the browning of America. I don't know if anyone wanted to hear it, but it was brought up in context largely of migration and immigration, which disturbed the extremists, quote unquote, the white supremacists. They're very disturbed by it, even to this day. You see, but it's been there. It was a hint in some of the higher journals. We knew it was coming, even more so with things like civil rights and the diversity that is already taking place within our society. Not only miscegenation or the blending of families racially, but more and more immigrants coming in. Chicago's receiving right now at least 200 people a day on buses coming from Texas. We used to be 16% Spanish speaking, we're now 43. So how do you prepare your children and grandchildren for that reality? From a Christian perspective, and not just waiting for people to duke it out, fight it, class struggle, bloodshed, all that kind of things. You know, how can we make a difference? Yes.
You spoke earlier of how the Catholic Church has somewhat stayed away from engaging in the kind of levers of power. If we look at our society today, oftentimes we focus on the national government or even the state governments, but those policies have little impact directly oftentimes on local communities. Do you think that the church should actually, or so in Catholic schools, we should actively push more of our parents and more of our students to go towards local government and actually have an actual movement of Catholics trying to get into local governments where they could then have influence on some of these things? Because I've rarely heard the church itself kind of advocated for that type of movement, and yet that seems where you could have actual facilitating power within your local communities.
According to statistics right now, Catholics are probably the most educated group of people in the United States. That is the result of our push to get our kids educated and to go to school and so forth and so on and so on. By the same token, the tables are turning against us because ideologically, Catholicism is being pushed to the wall on some of these IDI issues. And God only knows what's going to happen in the future. Religious liberty questions that are being fought in the courts today, what's acceptable or unacceptable. Beginning with the loss of our adoption agencies with Catholic Charities. The government won't play with us anymore because we do not place children with same-sex couples. We can't do that. That's just one signal of the fight that's just brewing. And you're going to have to watch these religious liberty issues as they come out of the courts, and especially the Supreme Court. We don't know where it's all going. But it could be that we're going to be isolated. What can I say? We're not the major player in the arena anymore on some of these new ideologies. But yes, to keep on pushing our young people to, if they are interested in political science, or they're interested in government, if they have those kinds of talents, by all means, get in there. But it's not going to be easy. It's going to be a fight to the death in instances, as I see it. Yes.
Bishop, you speak as if white privilege is a fact, and prejudice and discrimination and racism within the church is a fact.
We have to create our own. We're right now in Chicago, we're working on a curriculum based on the life of Augustus Tolton for kids in elementary and high school. Kids are most impressed by stories. And not only Augustus Tolton's story, because he was a former slave, a slave boy who somehow eventually made it as a priest, but there are other stories. There are Irish stories, there's Polish stories and Jewish stories, indigenous stories that are very impressive to kids. We should create our own curriculum for this. And the people who push back on it, let them push, but you push back and you bring the gospel with you. We can't just subside and think that, my God, wokeism is the day. It is taken over and that's what it is. No, the gospel is the rule of the day. And that's what we are about. Otherwise, why do we exist?
I was going to ask, do you know of excellent Catholic authors and resources that may do a good job of highlighting those factual pieces of information that are also authentically Catholic?
The ones that I'm most acquainted with are, I run into high school teachers, religion teachers, who have really created their own curriculum with the church's social teaching and somehow have broken it down for the palates of high schoolers and the upper grades in the elementary level. I haven't seen anything as a concerted text that somehow is approved. I think there's a lot of experimentation going on. I'd like to see some kind of maybe we have to have some sort of a convention, social teaching convention for high school religion teachers, RCIA people, and confirmation catechists, and so forth, to put some of this down and see what are the best practices out there. It's still a work in progress.
I also really appreciated the comments about really examining our consciences deeply of our own prejudices and
Where they came from.
digging deeply and
We all have them.
bringing them to confession.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you aware of any examinations of conscience that have that focus particularly that would be shareable?
Sure. There are, especially around Lent, with things like the Stations of the Cross, there's some things that have come out with Dorothy Day and her experience, her conversion experience, and the whole social teaching network. We have them with the USCCB. You can pick up some of those resources there. They have them. Mm-hmm. Good examinations of conscience. We Catholics are used to examinations of conscience.
Well, are there any other questions? I realized in my introduction that I never stopped to pray because my prayer was actually printed on the back side of my sheet. So I apologize for not doing that, but we are about to have lunch at 11:45, so if it's okay with you, I would like to lead the USCCB's prayer against racism, and then we'll go right into our lunchtime prayer and lunch.
Wonderful.
Thank
Good.
you so much
You're welcome.
for joining us, Bishop. So keeping in mind also today's day of prayer and fasting for peace and reconciliation in the Holy Land, I think this prayer is actually perfect for that as well. So let us pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Mary, friend and mother to all, through your Son, God has found a way to unite himself to every human being, called to be one people, sisters and brothers to each other. We ask for your help in calling on your Son, seeking forgiveness for the times when we have failed to love and respect one another. We ask for your help in obtaining from your Son the grace we need to overcome the evil of racism and to build a just society. We ask for your help in following your Son so that prejudice and animosity will no longer infect our minds or hearts, but will be replaced with a love that respects the dignity of each person. Mother of the Church, the Spirit of your Son Jesus warms our hearts. Pray for us. Amen.